Welcome back to From Pain to Gain. I'm Ivan, and I have again my compadre here, Jason Montoya. What's up, brother?
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to talking about some more beatituding.
Yes, we're gonna have an attitude about Beatitudes today. We're covering today. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So, a summary of this is mercy is an active virtue that Christians can show each other because we have been given mercy. Since God has forgiven our offenses, we should forgive others and show mercy. That's from the Bible Studies tool, BibleStudyTools.com. So I recommend that. We've been using that throughout this entire series. Jason, do you have other things you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I'll read this is verse Matthew 5:7. So in the Christian Standard Bible, it's blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And in the message, it's verse 7 is you are blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourself care for. So when you are caring others, you'll be cared for. So that's an interesting kind of care, using the word care instead of mercy.
Mm,
Um, but mercy, the this is just a little snippet from the Bible Project. As Jesus puts it, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And just imagine it, a group of powerless nobodies ruling the world through generosity and forgiveness and justice. This is the Jesus style revolution. The next thing Jesus says is, blessed are the pure in heart. So that'll be what we talk about next. But interestingly enough, blessed are the merciful is sandwiched between blessed are the pure in heart and blessed are those who thirst for righteousness. So yeah, that's when I think, one of the things I think about when I think about mercy, I think about mercy and grace, just in my own framework that I came up with, um, is mercy is before judgment, and grace I think of as after judgment. So if you've been convicted of a crime and you're going to go to jail for 2 years, grace would be essentially forgiving that sentence or taking that sentence upon, applying it where someone else takes that sentence for you. Whereas mercy would be showing mercy before the judgment, before you've been convicted. It might be a judge that shows you mercy in terms of the or even the prosecution that might say, well, we could prosecute you for this crime, but we're going to show you mercy and prosecute you for a lesser crime. So that's one way I think about mercy and grace and how they interact, is before and after judgment. That may not be a biblically sound way to do it, but that's one way that I slice and dice those hairs.
yeah, and what helps a judge to have a penance, be more lenient to the criminal that causes the offense, is that person confessing or at least having shown remorse uh,
Yeah.
at that behavior. Um,
Yeah. So I think in a more practical sense, you might think about parenting, like mercy might be showing mercy in the punishment you give a child or the discipline. Whereas if I give I tell my child, hey, you're grounded from video games for a week, and that's the punishment. And then like halfway through the week, I decide just, I'm going to make it half a week instead. That would be a form of grace. But I think in this context, again, as a reminder, we're talking about the presidential candidates and how does this apply to them?
mhm.
And but the Beatitudes, kind of taking a step back from that, is to remember that as a Christian, these Beatitudes are evidence that God is working in us.
Hmm.
So um, if he's working in us, then we should see, if someone's a Christian, we should see them becoming more and more merciful over their life and and then when they face really difficult situations and they face conflict and tension, that they're wrestling with how to demonstrate that mercy, even when it's very hard, or maybe it's not, uh, you know, they're not clear on how to apply it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would also add to that by saying the hard part about mercy is that it's not something you could see short term, American style, like I want it now. When we look at back at, for example, Dr. MLK, I read that during his time, he was actually pretty ineffective when it comes to statistics about changing policy, laws, people right then and there. But 20 years later, we see all the actions he took, all the mercy he had about on people, on even on his own peers of pastors when they were clearly wrong and trying to call him out. He still expressed mercy and just said, "This is what it is. This is what God clearly
Yeah.
stated." Um, and
Yeah, that's a really
yeah,
good point because you're referencing this concept of the cycle of retaliation. You punch me, I punch you back, you punch me, I punch you back harder, and it escalates and escalates.
mhm,
And what he did was he de-escalated an escalating situation, which when when it escalates, gives us justification to perpetuate violence on other people, right?
mhm.
And so he removed that justification, which forces us to reconcile that dynamic, right?
Yeah. And even though maybe may have to take time, and it's frustrating. Like it pisses me off when I have this perspective, right? And I want other people to have that perspective, but it could take decades for that
Yeah, no, I
one
think that's really
statement.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah, the changing hearts is a decade-long, multi-generational process.
Yeah.
I mean, I know someone that I talked with, it's a couple years ago that was older and is like actually 80s, and described some kind of sentiment, some racist sentiments he had, that he was ashamed of. Like he knew there was something wrong with it, but he had it and he sort of struggling with it. And so he's in his 80s. He obviously he's lived through a lot of the American history in terms of the racial tensions. Um, but you know, that's part of the journey, and
Hmm.
it's better to have that at 80 than to never have it at all, that
Yeah.
regret. Yeah.
And it's good um you being his friend, you showed mercy in that
Yeah.
him going through that perspective and saying, "You were wrong, you're stupid."
Yeah, and that's an important thing is, we want to respond, like I said, without mercy, but
Hmm.
showing mercy, someone is in a confessional sense, or in a confessional attitude, beatitude.
Hmm.
If we can meet them there and help them work through it and not condemn them, it could be an opportunity. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. If we look at this through the lens of the election cycle, how do we see Kamala acting out this mercy behavior?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it goes to similar things we've said before, which is, she talks about the story that inspired her, um, to get um, into leadership positions politically, helping her friend who was being abused, helping, the story of the Good Samaritan, helping the person who's been hurt and on the side, and so sort of uh, embodying mercy towards those people that have been hurt and damaged. I think I think that's beyond that. I think I guess you could almost say she gets a lot of criticism for many acts of mercy that she's had in her positions of authority, where she hasn't been as harsh or as severe to some of the people and situations of which she resided over in her, like when she was the attorney general for California. I don't know a lot about the details of those to sort of go one way or the other, but I do know that she has been criticized for some of her um, expressions of mercy. So
Yeah, I'm trying to just look up any aspects of her history, especially as a prosecutor, to see any descriptions of her history on the mercy front.
yeah, I mean, I think there's another dynamic of her approach to this election being bipartisan, campaigning with Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, um, saying she wants a bipartisan council in her White House, saying she's going to have a Republican in her cabinet. I mean, she could say, you know what, Republicans have been so horrible, that I'm not going to lend them any voice in my administration if I win. But instead she's invited those people in. And so that's an interesting dynamic, that she's reached across the aisle in that regard,
Hmm.
as a layer of mercy. Um,
Yeah. To try to, looks like there's some parts, very positive parts, which of her prosecutorial career that we have already mentioned, like the Banks situation and others. But there are some aspects where the the law did not exactly pan out. Um, Apparently, the Harris's office convicted the wrong man. Um,
yeah. So
Looks
that would
like
be a
there were,
situation where she failed to demonstrate mercy, if that's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it says specifically her office. So that must mean there's a lot of people involved. So there could have been details
Yeah.
that were not directly in her purview, but that's something that occurred. Um, she went after a predatory for-profit college. Um, so it was Corinthian Colleges Incorporated, designed to rake in profits and mislead investors. And they targeted vulnerable people, including low-income single mothers and veterans returning
Mhm.
from combat. Uh, Harris won a judgment against them for $1.1 billion.
Yeah. So that would be an example of her having mercy on those that have been victimized and helping
Yeah.
them instead of further victimizing them.
Yeah. So overall, from what I'm reading, there's a lot, as you could imagine, a lot of cases. Um, they're all positive on the positive side. But being one person, I don't know. I don't even know how many cases she took on during her time. There's got to be something that is going to be missing. It's not going
Yeah.
to always turn out perfectly, especially when there's all sorts of legal dynamics going on. Even
Yeah.
one word in one sentence could, determine somebody's fate, unfortunately, in the legal system.
Yeah.
Um, so overall, I would say, yeah, she's great, merciful, and very gracious. Uh, when it comes to, um, I guess we could move on to Trump. Well, actually, before we do, let's describe the importance of mercy. One pastor I heard described how if God had no discipline whatsoever, then he would not be a fair God, because if everybody could do crimes, then it's just, all pandemonium all the time. That's not an orderly
Yeah.
God or orderly God kingdom. Do you have a thought on that before we move on to Trump?
Well, give me like more specifically, what are you asking?
Oh, like in terms of the rules that God puts down, uh, why some people would say, why can't I just live my best life? Why is same-sex marriage against God? Why is X, Y, and Z in the Bible, which I disagree with? Um, it's another analogy that I remember was another pastor mentioned. If you have some carpenter that made a table, uh, and you decided to remove one leg because you think it's better, is that really something that you should own, or should the person that created the table have full rights to how the table is used, you know?
Yeah, I guess I'm still kind of grasping there in terms of where to drive it, but
Well,
um
how about this? How about when you think about your kids, as we get older, we get probably more concerned about their lives because we're getting older and we know we have more wisdom.
Yeah.
Do you see like the value of rules and law and
Yeah,
boundaries
yeah.
there?
Yeah, so I think there's value to that structure for everyone for different reasons. And you carry through generations, it becomes important because that's how you carry on from one to the next in part of the generational transition. But there's a limit to the law, and the New Testament talks about those limits and how at
Mm,
the end of the day, the law really just reveals how incomplete we are or how much we fall short of the law. And for us, for different people, it's different. Some people fall short in an obvious criminal sense, but what Jesus comes around and says is that we fall short in our hearts, even if we've followed the letter of the law. We have failed the morality of the law that's there, and so that's an important facet to just keep in mind. And I think one of the things that, in terms of mercy, is we always want to be shown mercy when we've violated the law, when we've broken a rule. And part of that, but then when someone else violates the rule against us, we tend to not. A lot of times we don't want them to have mercy. So we want it for ourselves, but we don't necessarily want it for others. And so that's an interesting dynamic. It's not always the case, but I think as Christians, we become more likely to want mercy for others that have broken the rules. Um, and I think Martin Luther King Jr., as an example, like you said, was one example. Because we want to change the hearts and then we want to change things. Now, if someone is not repentant and they don't want to change, that's a different situation than someone who breaks a rule and is repentant about it, acknowledges it, and is repentant. It's very different than someone who breaks a rule and then doubles down on it and says, actually, that was a good thing. I'm glad I stole the cookie jar. I stole the cookies out of the cookie jar, and I'm very
mm,
proud of that. That's a very different thing than, yeah, I stole the cookies. I'm ashamed. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. How can I make it right? Those are very different responses. So
mm.
there is a place for law and rule of law and a system and authorities, judges, because some people fall in that second category, or they fall into the first one too, and there still needs to be a consequence for their actions. Um, but there can be mercy as well. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
Yeah, it does. And we could go on a separate episode for that one. A lot of
yeah,
things came up for me. But yeah, let's move on to Trump because we're
yeah,
trying to hold these on to under 30 minutes or so.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. So we
So,
can jump in. One quick thing I will say: there are some stories I just remembered about Harris in terms of where she's maybe failed as a merciful person.
okay.
Um, there's former people that have worked for her that have talked about just how tough she is as a boss, um, and staff that has quit and stuff. And I don't know the details of how legitimate or not those are, or what those grievances are, but I did want to bring that up because it came to mind. So
Oh yeah, yeah. I vaguely remember something about a lot of her staff being fired even in the first year of her being a vice president.
yeah, something like that. So
Yeah.
Um, so whatever the reason, and that's something I don't know a lot of detail, but that could be a situation where she we'd have to investigate to see if that was any related to Mercy at all. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, we can jump to Trump. So, I mean, with Trump, when you think about merciful, like if there's a person I think about who's on the opposite end of that spectrum, it's Donald Trump.
Hmm.
He talks not about mercy, but about retribution. He villainizes groups of people that are vulnerable, like immigrants, talks in violent and genocidal ways about them. Um, he's not showing
Hmm.
mercy to the immigrant. He's doing the opposite. He's actually he's riling hate against immigrants and many just regularly. If he, what I think fundamentally is he's failing to see that he's failing to see the immigrant in himself, his own dependency, his own vulnerability that they have, and and his failure to show mercy on these vulnerable groups. Um, and he does the opposite. It's
Yeah,
wrath and retribution.
even to his own party too. Anybody that
Yeah,
goes against him, will catch an
Yeah,
axe quick.
dissidents.
Yeah,
If you don't, if you're not loyal, you're gonna get his wrath. I mean, Liz Cheney, he said he's talked about putting her through a military tribunal because she's spoken out against him and others. He talked about I think it was General Mattis or Milley,
yeah.
that he should be tried and hung for treason.
That's an unfortunate name for a man, by the way. Let's address
Milley,
that.
Milley
He has
Bob
my mom's
Thornton.
he has my mom's name.
uh, um,
We must
I
pray for
mean, you
him.
could, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's hard to think about Trump and mercy in the same sentence without
Yeah,
just
even
seeing how
he
unmerciful he is.
he's even talked about how he could limit journalism too if he gets back in office. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. So even if it's, yeah, he just talks about, I guess you could make the argument that he's merciful to those that are loyal to him in the moment. Um, but then if you become, if you don't toe the loyalty, then you fall out of that mercy. So it's a very, I guess you could say it's a very performance based mercy, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
even to that point of in the moment, it's highly variable because he really kind of flies by the seat of his pants, as they say.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like
By the
when he was,
whims of the wind.
yeah, uh, like when he came to Georgia many times and would openly talk bad about Governor Brian Kemp.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, many people and his staff told him before uh, that this is going to be awful if you do this, because
Yeah.
now anybody that rallies around Brian, which is, I think, sort of on the middle, is going to feel like they are they don't want to be a part of the group necessarily, and every vote matters. So if you
Yeah.
lose Georgia from a emotional outburst like that he's done many times, then that's just bad planning, bad execution.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing, like just the looking at the details of Trump's trials and all of the ways he's really exploited people. Um, like this issue of mercy just becomes more and more uh it fades away. Like you just see how he's exploited people and how much he's just taken advantage of people, and it's just the opposite of being merciful to those people. So I mean, it could be vendors that he didn't pay. You know, he had them do a service and then said, well, I don't want to pay them for whatever reason, doesn't pay them. That's not showing mercy. So
Oh yes, yes.
yeah.
And when he recovered from all his six bankruptcies, he could have made money to
Hmm.
address those contractors, numerous,
Yeah.
but he decided not to. Um, so it just shows also when the opportunity for mercy is there, it's just not even an afterthought.
Yeah.
It's all about how he could line his
Hmm.
pockets further. Now,
So
I do want to say, for as a general rule, uh, there's probably no billionaire that hasn't done some questionable things to get to that amount of money.
yeah.
But I will say probably nobody compares to how consistently exponential that Trump has done it. There was somebody that said, one of my former business coaches, that to become a billionaire, there have to be some bodies involved.
Yeah. I mean, I think as business, I mean, just my own business journey, when I went through the marketing company, yeah, I mean, I had a wreckage, a wake of brokenness behind me,
Hmm.
whether it's clients or staff members or whoever. And and I regretted that. And so I went, you know, there was one point along the journey where I wrote a list of all these people that had worked for me, clients. And it was particularly the list of people that had worked with me. I said, wow, that's a lot, the turnover, right? Like we mentioned.
Hmm.
Um, I said, that's a lot of people for such a small business and such a fairly short period of time. And I looked at the list and I realized, yeah, I have some wreckage here. And so I went through sort of a truth and reconciliation campaign and of my own, and went to all those people and took responsibility for my part of it and apologized to them. And so that was my repentance tour. And then as a freelancer, I've really been knowing that possibility, and I've taken a different approach to things where, hey, that's something that could happen, so I'm going to change how I operate so that I minimize when those happen, and then when if they do happen, they're a lot smaller and not as big of a deal. um but yeah, there's a lot of some of them showed me mercy in response to my apologizing. Some told me to go pound sand and never talk to them again. So
Oh, that's weird.
yeah.
You don't even live near a beach.
I do not. But they said find a beach, pound the sand, and leave.
So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, it's just so wide ranging.
Yeah.
Um, and if you get a moment, I encourage you as a listener, watcher, to check out the movie The Apprentice, which showed how Roy Cohn was one of Trump's mentors and how that established who he was and sadly how it played out later. Um, if I had to put it in one comment, the gist of it is if you have somebody that creates a power vacuum that involves a lot of money and that could give you results even at questionable means, without having something like Christ as your foundation, you could be pulled into that vacuum pretty
Mhm.
easily.
Yeah. And then we're trapped, and it's without intervention, it could be impossible to get out.
Yeah.
I one other I'll mention two other movies to just wrap up this mercy chapter here, which is, the Lord of the Rings. Frodo shows mercy to Gollum, you know, and Gandalf encourages that, and it ends up being the critical thing because without Gollum at the end, the ring, Frodo would have taken the ring for himself, kind of like what you're describing with the apprentice. He would have taken the ring for himself and walked away, but because Gollum was there and he had shown mercy on him, they end up fighting, and then the ring falls into the Mount Doom and is destroyed. So his
Mhm.
mercy was necessary, to prevent his own corruption and then also destroy the evil power. And then the other example was a movie we saw together, which was the most recent Mission Impossible: The Reckoning Part One, where they showed it mercy to the one of the villains henchwomen, and at the end of the movie when they're like falling through, the train's falling off the tracks and they're about to die, that's the person who saves them from their death. And so we never
Mhm.
know what hangs in the balance when we show mercy to someone, and the ripple effect it can have. And that can be for those that show us mercy, and for when we show it to others. And so that's the way of Christ and the way of life that he calls us and transforms us into.
Yeah. And to tie that story of the Mission Impossible back into the bodies equation, the assassin that was essentially delaying Tom Cruise from getting to his past, uh, I guess you could call girlfriend, and avoiding her death, she was essentially in the way of that. So
Yeah.
he could have been justified in murdering her to
Hmm.
achieve the mean of saving his ex-girlfriend, but he was called to something higher,
Yeah.
which is what we are called to in Christianity too.
Yeah.
All
Cool.
right, this has been the episode upon, let me see here. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Catch you in the next video.